The night deepens. The curtains of my hospital room were closed now. Had I closed them? I looked at the clock again, then almost got up to see if it was unplugged. Time seemed to stand still. I needed to talk to someone. Perhaps a nurse would come visit with me, or better yet, I could call home. I reached across the bed and got the phone. Moments later, it was ringing, and Donna, our 15-year-old, answered it. She immediately asked if I was okay. It was wonderful to hear the concern in her voice. I told her that everything was fine, but that I was a little lonely. "Dad isn't home yet," she said. My heart dropped. I wanted to desperately talk to him. "Mom, are you okay?" She asked, and I said, "Yes, I'm fine." But what I wanted to say was, "Please get Dad and send him back. Get him here as soon as you can." My apprehensions were growing. I heard little voices over the phone. "I want to talk to Mom. Hey, give me the phone." "I'll tell Dad." And the sounds of home made me feel better. I spent the next half hour saying goodnight to each child, but when I hung up, the loneliness fell on me again like a blanket. The room seemed darker, and the distance between the hospital and our home felt more like 1,000,000 miles than just across town. My family was life itself to me, and being away from them scared me, hurt me. But as I thought again of each of my children, and of course of my husband Joe, I felt better, and at that point, nobody in the world could have convinced me that in only hours I wouldn't care if I ever returned home to them again. In fact, I would be begging not to return to them. I had always thought that my husband and children would eventually replace the family I had missed in my childhood. I had promised myself that when I married and began my own family, that they would be my prime interest and my greatest refuge. I promised myself that I would love my husband and remain with him through thick and thin, and that our children would always be able to count on us being together. When I turned 15, I was sent to live with my mother. My father felt that a maturing young lady should be with her mother, not in a boarding school or with him. My mother found also that she needed a babysitter while she worked full-time, so I was taken out of school and stayed at home to care for my youngest sister. As I spent each day at home, I began to feel sorry for myself, watching the neighborhood kids go to school in the mornings and come home in the afternoons. I wasn't fully aware yet of what an education would mean to me as I got older, but I knew that I missed the companionship of friends and my other brothers and sisters. Within a short time, I began to feel that the only way out was for me to get married and start a family of my own. I felt that my life was controlled by the needs of others and that I was losing the right to any personal happiness. I wanted clothes of my own, a bed of my own, a home of my own. I wanted a husband I could trust, one who would always love me no matter what happened in our lives. It was no wonder then that I fell hopelessly in love with the boy next door and married him the following spring. My father was adamantly against it, but I was living with my mother and she supported it. I was 15 and very naive as to what the demands of a real family were, the immaturity of us both, and the fact that we had vastly different goals in life ended our marriage 6 years later. My dream was broken and I had a wounded soul that would take a lot of patience and love to heal. I have never regretted this marriage though, because it gave me 4 beautiful children. My first were 2 girls, Donna and Cheryl, and then I had a son, Glenn. Our youngest, Cynthia, died at 3 months of SIDS. I met Joe at a dance the Christmas following my divorce. He was stationed at Stead Air Force Base near Reno, Nevada, where I was living then. Joe, too, had been through a divorce, and as I got to know him, I found that we had a lot in common. He had a background similar to my own, and also a desire for a strong family unit. We seemed to fit somehow. Even my children wanted him to be with us, perhaps more than I did at first, and the time came rapidly when we married. From the beginning, it seemed almost too good to be true. Joe had a tenderness about him that I had not experienced before. He was tremendously patient with the children, yet firm enough that they responded to his love. They fought over who would be first at the door to greet him when he returned from work at night. Joe was Dad to them from the beginning in every way. We wanted to remain together, and that, combined with our growing maturity, is the glue that has held us together through the years. As we moved from place to place, and as we adjusted in our own lives, we simply made the commitment to work things out and keep our family together, no matter what the cost. Our desires were to the family first and ourselves second. In July of 1963, Joe was transferred to Rudolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Computers were making their debut, and Joe was reassigned to learn computer programming. During our 4 years in Texas, I gave birth to 2 boys, Joseph Jr. and Stuart Jeffrey. We were living a dream come true. We had a new car, a new house, complete with air conditioning. The kids had plenty of clothes, and I was able to stay home and care for them. I truly felt blessed. The security and job I felt now seemed an eternity away from the boarding schools and loneliness of my childhood and broken marriage. But still, I knew that something was missing. I still prayed, but my relationship with God seemed distant and filled with fear. I knew that He had answered my prayers from time to time, such as after my divorce, when I had prayed for someone loving and patient to help me raise my children. He had literally led me to Joe. I believed that God was real and loved His children, despite His professed vengeance. But I had no idea how to incorporate that love into my family or how to share it with my children. I discussed the matter with Joe and suggested that we begin attending a church. He was less than enthusiastic, mostly because of earlier experiences that had disillusioned him about religion. I respected his position, but still saw a way to bring a stronger sense of religious belief into our family. We attended a few local churches, but we didn't feel satisfied, and after a while, I just let things go. My beliefs about religion would remain uncertain for many years. The nurse came into my room and interrupted my thoughts. She had a little cup of sleeping pills, but I refused them because of my aversion to almost any type of medication. My fear of drugs went back a long way, and I seldom even took aspirin, preferring instead to tough out a headache or illness. The nurse went out of the room, and I was left again with my thoughts. In the utter loneliness of the night, my thoughts now turned to the surgery just hours away. Would everything be all right? I had heard many stories of people dying on the operating table. Would I be another? Images of graveyards filled my mind. I conjured up scenes of tombstones and crosses around skeletons' necks in buried coffins. I began wondering about the last rites, something I had heard about in my youth. I tried to figure out why the dead wore crosses. Was it to show God that they were saints? Or were they sinners who needed protection from the demons of hell? Gloom settled more strongly upon me, the darkness still tugging at me, and I reached over to the buzzer and called the nurse. "Do you have any of those pills handy?" I asked when she came in. She gave me a puzzled look for a moment, but she got the pills for me. I took them and thanked her as she turned down the lights and shut the door. It was a while before I felt drowsy, and finally, I said my prayers and went to sleep. The second day. Morning came quickly, with the sunlight sneaking around the edges of the curtains. The surgery was scheduled for noon. I could either wake up and wait for hours, or I could enjoy the luxury of sleeping in. I was still groggy from the sleeping pill, or perhaps I was exhausted from my fear and anxiety of the night before. Now, with the morning light brightening the room, I relaxed and began to reflect on the last time I had been in a hospital. My fears of the previous night had been slight compared to my fears then. At least this time, I knew what was supposed to happen. Joe retired from the Air Force in 1967, and we had looked at the many options open to him in a new civilian career. Computers were becoming a new industry in themselves, and his training qualified him to begin a new career just about anywhere he wanted. All we had to decide was which side of the country we wanted to live on. We finally chose to move to the Pacific Northwest, where Joe would take a position at a large aerospace corporation. We felt that the climate would be a welcome contrast to the hot, dry weather we had become accustomed to in Texas. Also, we would be able to live near my father and his wife, who now lived in the Northwest. Shortly after moving there, I became pregnant with our 7th child. This was not the kind of surprise we wanted, feeling that we had all the children we could properly care for, 5 children living. We had taken precautions to prevent another pregnancy. My 6 previous pregnancies had weakened my body, and the doctors had discouraged me from having another child. In the 3rd month, I began experiencing severe cramping and bleeding. The doctors told me that I was passing fetal tissue. Because of this and other complications, they were sure that I would miscarry soon. I was admitted to the hospital for a week as the bleeding continued. We waited for my body to dispose of the damaged fetus naturally. Soon it became apparent that the pregnancy was not going to terminate, and one of the doctors suggested that I consider aborting it. He believed that the baby, if carried to term, would most likely be born with parts of its body missing. I had no reason to doubt him. After discussing it with Joe, we decided to undergo the surgery. The day before the scheduled abortion, I was in the hospital to be examined by another team of doctors, and they were in agreement that we should continue as planned. Where was I? Just as the last doctor passed by me to leave the room, he said, "We don't understand why that little fellow is hanging in there." I felt a chill pass through me, and the thought came to me, "Don't do this. You must have this child. He wants to be born." When Joe came to visit me at the hospital that evening, I explained what the doctors had said and told him about my impressions that this child should be born. We talked about going ahead with the pregnancy and having a deformed child. Neither of us wanted to do it, but I knew that I couldn't live with myself if I aborted this child now. Joe agreed that we had to keep it, and we met later that night with the doctors and explained our feelings. They were adamant. We must abort the damaged fetus. They said that no doctor would approve the continuation of the pregnancy and that they certainly wouldn't be a part of it. I was discharged from the hospital the next day and began looking for a doctor who would accept me on my terms. I finally found a young doctor who had just begun his private practice after spending several years in the Air Force. He felt a kinship with Joe because of their common background and agreed to take me on as a patient. He saw some possibility that the baby might live, but he too was afraid it would be born deformed. He put me to bed and gave me a list of orders to follow. Joe and the kids were great in filling in for me around the house, and I used the time to take some home study courses and finish my high school education. As the months flew by and we rapidly approached my due date, I became increasingly frightened. We prepared the children for the likely outcome that the baby would be born either deformed, possibly with parts of its body missing, or it could die. Joe and I tried to comfort each other by recalling often my impressions upon hearing the doctor's words. "This little fellow is still hanging in there." This was during the times when hospitals didn't allow fathers in delivery rooms, and the thought of facing this child's birth without Joe near me was terrifying. Though the hospital staff agreed to let Joe stay with me during the delivery, they were apprehensive about Joe's possible reaction to it. They told him that if he fainted or became ill during the experience, that their first responsibility would be to me. He was asked to sign a waiver that exempted them from liability for him. Labor began, and I entered the hospital on June 19, 1968. I was so frightened that my body shook uncontrollably. Joe stood by me in the delivery room, holding my hand and stroking my head. He had to wear a green gown and white mask like the doctors. His gray-blue eyes tried to comfort me, but I could tell by the puffing in and out of the mask that he was as terrified as I was. As delivery approached, we tightly clutched hands. As the baby was born, I watched the doctor's eyes. I knew immediately that our months of fear and anguish had been in vain. He laid the baby on my stomach so I could hold it, and Joe and I quickly looked it over from head to toe. We began crying. Our son was as perfect and healthy as any baby ever born. I knew as I held him that indeed this baby was meant to come to me, and that it did very much want to be born. Although I would not have changed my decision for anything, the pregnancy took a toll on my body. Over the next few years, a multitude of problems developed, and my doctor suggested that I have a hysterectomy. After thoughtfully considering it and discussing it with Joe, I decided to go along with the doctor's recommendation, and the date for my surgery was set. Now, the morning of the surgery, a new nurse came in and prodded me awake. She wanted to give me a shot to put me back to sleep in preparation for the surgery. I was amused that she was waking me up to put me back to sleep. I probably would have laughed, but I was already feeling the drug working through my veins with its warmth spreading throughout my body. The doctor must have come in about then, because I heard his voice say, "Is she ready?" And everything quietly became black. It was afternoon before I regained some awareness. My doctor was standing by me saying that the surgery had been a success and that I should be feeling fine shortly. And I remember thinking to myself, this is great. Now I can finally get some rest and stop worrying about the surgery. And I fell back to sleep. That night, I awoke and looked around me. Although I was in a semi-private room, I was alone. The other bed was empty. The room was cheerfully decorated with brightly stripped orange and yellow wallpaper. Loud, I thought, but cheerful. I noticed 2 nightstands, 2 closets, a television set, and a large window near my bed. I had asked for a window because ever since my childhood, I had suffered from claustrophobia. It was dark outside, and the only light in the room was the night light over the sink by the door. I rang for the nurse and asked for some water. She said I had been given ice chips since earlier that afternoon, but I had no recollection of getting any. And she said that my husband and some friends had been in and visited with me, but I couldn't recall seeing them. I was conscious of the fact, however, that my makeup was a mess and that I really didn't appreciate anybody seeing me when I didn't know about it. And then there was my gown. As I looked down, I realized that it covered only the bare essentials. I would have to talk to Joe about bringing his friends around. At 9 o'clock, the nurse brought my evening medication. Except for a little pain from the surgery, I felt fine. I took the pills and settled down and watched a little television before sleeping. I must have dozed off because when I looked at the clock again, it was 9:30, and I was suddenly feeling lightheaded and had the sudden urge to call Joe. I found the phone and somehow managed to dial him. I do not remember the conversation. I was becoming so tired that all I wanted to do was sleep. I managed to turn off the television set, then pull the blanket up under my neck. I was beginning to feel chilled to my bones and weaker than I had ever felt before.